The episode of SmackDown was supposed to end with a standard contract signing. Canvas was gray, the ropes were tight, and the air inside the arena felt stale, heavy with the humidity of a crowd that had spent 2 hours cheering for manufactured moments. But then the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't a sudden blackout or a pyrotechnic explosion that signals a scheduled surprise. It was something far more unsettling. The audio feed crackled, not with static, but with a low, humming feedback loop that made the thousands in attendance instinctively cover their ears. It wasn't part of the show. You could see the referees glancing at the timekeeper's area with genuine confusion, their earpieces pulled out, trying to understand if a technical failure was derailing the main event. Commentary stopped talking. That is the first sign of a legitimate deviation from the script when the voices designed to guide you suddenly fall silent because they have no lines to read. The camera operators didn't zoom in on the ring. They panned wide, scanning the rafters and the entrance ramp, looking for the source of the discomfort. The champion in the ring, who had been mid-promo, lowered the microphone, her expression shifting from arrogance to genuine irritation. This wasn't the kind of heat she wanted. The crowd wasn't booing. They were murmuring, a low rumble of unease that sounded like a storm gathering distance. It felt like an invasion, not a return. The Titantron remained black, devoid of graphics or logos, creating a void at the top of the ramp that felt like a gaping mouth waiting to speak. Then, the hum stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so loud it felt violent. The arena held its breath, waiting for a sound that would make sense of the fear. When the silhouette finally broke the darkness of the entrance tunnel, there was no pop. There was no explosion of joy or the man chants. The reaction was a collective gasp, followed by a stunned, suffocating hush. Becky Lynch walked out, but she didn't walk with the swagger of the Irish lass kicker or the confidence of big-time Bex. She walked slowly, methodically, wearing a simple, oversized hoodie that obscured her eyes, her hands buried deep in her pockets. She looked smaller, yet infinitely more dangerous, stripped of the theatrics that usually define a superstar's re-entry. The lighting rig didn't dance. It remained fixed in a singular cold spotlight that tracked her solitary path down the ramp. The fans in the front row didn't reach out to touch her. They pulled back. It was as if they were witnessing a ghost walking through a graveyard of her own legacy. You could see the confusion on their faces, people turning to each other, mouthing, "Is that her?" The commentary team finally broke their silence, but their voices were hushed, stripped of their usual broadcast polish. They didn't scream her name. They whispered it, questioning the reality of what they were seeing. She didn't look at the camera. She didn't acknowledge the signs. She walked with a burden, a heaviness that suggested this wasn't a triumph, but a necessity. The atmosphere was thick with a strange melancholy, the kind of feeling you get when you see someone you used to know, only to realize they are a stranger now. This wasn't a wrestling return. It was a reckoning arriving on foot, step by heavy step, towards a ring that suddenly felt like a judgment stand. She climbed the steel steps without looking up, every movement deliberate and exhausted. As she pulled herself through the ropes, the champion stood frozen in the corner, clutching the title belt not as a prize but as a shield. Becky stood in the center of the ring and finally pulled back her hood. The face revealed wasn't the one that smiled on morning talk shows. It was gaunt, hardened, with eyes that looked right through the hard cam and into something far away. She didn't ask for a microphone. She didn't need one. The silence in the arena was so absolute that you could hear the scuff of her boots on the canvas. She walked up to the champion, invading her personal space with a terrifying calmness. There was no shoving match, no nose-to-nose shouting. Becky just stared. It was a look of profound disappointment, not at the woman standing in front of her, but at the industry itself. The crowd began to stir, waiting for the first punch, the first finisher, but it never came. Instead, Becky slowly reached out and touched the championship belt. She didn't yank it away. She just rested her hand on the leather, feeling the weight of it, before retracting her hand as if it burned her. The champion flinched. That single flinch told the entire story, the fear of a legend who has nothing left to lose. The tension was unbearable. A wire pulled so tight it had to snap, but Becky simply turned her back. It was the ultimate disrespect. She turned her back on the gold, on the opponent, and on the expectations of the millions watching, signaling that whatever she was here for, it was far more personal than a championship belt. The moment the broadcast faded to black, the illusion of control evaporated. Reports from backstage described a scene closer to a crime site than a sporting event. Producers were scrambling, headsets were thrown, and the gorilla position, usually the nerve center of the show, was in total disarray. Wrestlers who were usually glued to monitors studying matches were standing in the hallways, whispering. The return hadn't been on the run sheet. The locker room, usually a place of camaraderie or scripted rivalry, was fractured by genuine anxiety. The younger talent looked rattled, realizing that the hierarchy they had been climbing had just been shattered by a force they couldn't prepare for. Veterans were seen huddled in corners, making frantic phone calls. The question wasn't, who is she fighting, but why is she here? The mood shifted from professional jealousy to personal concern. Was this sanctioned? Was she rogue? The lines between work and shoot were blurred so aggressively that no one knew how to react. Security was doubled around the locker room doors, not to keep fans out, but to keep the chaos contained. We saw glimpses of management pacing, their faces pale, realizing that the narrative they had carefully constructed for the road to WrestleMania had just been torched. The media scrums waiting outside the arena were ignored. Usually a return is a PR opportunity, a chance to sell merchandise and tickets. This time no one was selling anything. The merchandise stands were closed early. The mood backstage wasn't excitement. It was the cold realization that a storm had made landfall, and nobody had boarded up the windows. As the dust settled in the days following the appearance, the gravity of the moment sank in. This wasn't about ratings, and it wasn't about a pop. It was a mirror held up to the current state of the industry. Becky Lynch didn't return to save the division, she returned to judge it. The internet was ablaze, not with fantasy booking, but with analysis of her body language, her silence, the apathy she showed toward the things she used to die for. It forced every fan to look inward. We cheer for the violence, the drama, the high spots, but we rarely ask what it costs the people who give it to us. Her return was a haunting reminder of that cost. It lingered in the mind long after the video ended. It wasn't the viral clip of a finisher that stayed with you. It was the image of her turning her back on the title. It was a rejection of the very thing that defined her existence for a decade. The story wasn't the man has come around. The story was the man has realized it was all for nothing, and that is the most terrifying narrative of all. It leaves us with a question that can't be answered with a match or a promo. When the lights go down and the cheering stops, who are these people really? Becky Lynch came back to show us that sometimes the hero doesn't return to slay the dragon. Sometimes, the hero returns to burn down the castle because they realized it was built on a lie.